All right, today we're gonna peel back the layers of history to get to the foundational story of Britain. And it's a story that isn't about just one people, but about wave after wave of invaders, settlers, and empire builders who all left their mark.
It's a huge question, right? How is a country's identity actually built? Is it about language or borders? Maybe a shared set of beliefs? Or is it something else entirely?
Well, for this island nation, the answer is layers. Its identity was literally forged in layers. Think of it like slices of rock. Each new group arrived and settled right on top of the one that came before, creating this incredibly rich, complex, and, yeah, sometimes chaotic foundation.
So, this timeline? This is our roadmap. We're going to trace the story from the very first farmers through the Roman attempt to bring order, the rise of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the fury of the Vikings, and finally, the absolute game-changer that was the Norman conquest. Each of these dates marks a huge shift for the island.
So, let's start at the very beginning. Before any of the great empires even knew Britain existed, who was actually there? This is our foundational layer.
For thousands and thousands of years, this was an island of hunter-gatherers. But then, around 4000 BC, everything changed. When the first farmers showed up, and we're not talking about simple communities here. No way. These people were sophisticated engineers, building these mind-blowing monuments like Stonehenge that honestly still puzzle us today. By the Iron Age, this had all evolved into a bunch of Celtic tribes with fortified towns and local kings who were powerful enough to mint their very own coins. This was the vibrant, established culture the Romans were about to walk into.
Okay, next up is the layer that basically tried to pave over everything that came before it, the Romans. They didn't just want to conquer. They brought a whole new, highly structured blueprint for society that they wanted to impose on this Celtic foundation.
And what's really fascinating here is that the Romans didn't get it right on the first try. The legendary Julius Caesar himself gave it a shot back in 55 BC, and he failed. It took almost a whole century for Emperor Claudius to come back in AD 43 with a professional invasion force that would finally bring most of Britain under the eagle standard of Rome.
But, ruling Britain wasn't exactly a walk in the park for them. They faced fierce resistance from leaders like the famous warrior queen, Boudica, and their power definitely had its limits. They never managed to conquer the northern parts of the island, which is why they ended up building the massive Hadrian's Wall to mark their frontier. Still, their influence was profound. They brought new roads, new laws, and even the seeds of a new religion, Christianity. Their blueprint was powerful, but it was an imported system, and it needed the empire to keep it going.
And then came the year 410. The Roman Empire, which was crumbling from the inside, pulled its legions out. After nearly 400 years of imposed order, Britain was suddenly left to fend for itself. A massive power vacuum was created.
You know what they say, nature abhors a vacuum, and boy does history too. The second the Romans left, the floodgates opened for new groups from Northern Europe to pour in, creating the next incredibly complex layer of Britain's identity.
So, who filled this power vacuum? Well, it was mainly 3 tribes, all coming from Northern Europe. As you can see here, they were the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons. They started crossing the sea, first as raiders just looking for loot, but pretty soon they came as settlers looking for land. And together, this wave of people would become known as the Anglo-Saxons.
And their impact? It was absolutely transformative. By the year 600, they'd set up a bunch of new kingdoms all across the land, pushing the native Celtic peoples out to the west and north. This is the period when the whole idea of England, or Angleland, really starts to take shape, while places like Wales and Scotland remain defiantly free of their rule.
But just when the Anglo-Saxons were starting to get comfortable, a brand new threat appeared on the horizon. Starting in 789, ships from Denmark and Norway began raiding the coastlines. These were, of course, the Vikings, and just like the Saxons before them, their hit-and-run raids soon turned into full-blown settlement.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it created this kind of historical paradox. The Viking threat was a huge deal. It could have completely wiped the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms off the map. But instead, that constant, brutal pressure actually had the opposite effect. It forced all these squabbling peoples to finally unite against a common enemy.
So this unification, it actually happened on 2 separate fronts. Down in the south, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms rallied behind one leader, Alfred the Great, who managed to push back the Vikings and lay the groundwork for a unified England. Meanwhile, up in the north, a very similar thing was happening, with different peoples uniting under Kenneth MacAlpin to form the kingdom that would eventually become Scotland. From then on, Anglo-Saxon kings would rule England, with one notable exception, a short period under the powerful Danish king, Canute.
And that brings us to our final layer. And let me tell you, it is dramatic and it's arguably the most decisive one of them all, the Norman Conquest.
1066. I mean, if there is one single date that everybody remembers from English history, it's got to be this one. This was the year everything changed. Forever.
So what happened? Well, it all came to a head at the Battle of Hastings. Think of it like a heavyweight title fight. In one corner, you have the new Anglo-Saxon king Harold, defending his throne, and in the other, an ambitious and ruthless challenger from France, William, the Duke of Normandy, who has invaded to claim the crown for himself.
William's victory wasn't just a win, it was absolute. As the conqueror, he didn't just take the crown, he totally remade the country's power structure. The entire Anglo-Saxon nobility, gone, replaced with a new French-speaking elite. To control his new kingdom, he ordered the creation of the Domesday Book, this stunningly detailed survey of all the land and wealth, and he built these massive stone castles like the Tower of London as symbols of his power. The Norman imprint was swift, it was systematic, and it was total.
So let's just pull it all together, right? You can really see how these 4 distinct layers just built one on top of the other. You start with that ancient Celtic foundation. Then the Romans come in and lay their blueprint of law and order over it. That collapses, and out of the chaos, the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings forge the actual kingdoms of England and Scotland. And finally, the Normans arrive and impose a brand new order from the top down.
You see, every single one of these groups probably thought they were creating the final version of Britain, but each one was just adding another layer to a story that's still being written. These ancient foundations didn't just vanish, they built a nation. So the real question is, where can we still see the echoes of Celts, Romans, Vikings, and Normans in Britain today?